Good afternoon, POLSC2303, Introduction to International Relations. Once again, I am your professor, Professor Wes Jameson, and we are starting a new section. It's going to be war. Today we're going to be talking about the causes of war, essentially why war occurs. But before we get too far into this, we're going to talk a little bit about the test that we had last week. For the most part, I thought you guys did really well. The average was, of course, 77, which is, honestly fairly high. We had multiple A's, a few B's. The majority of you guys tended to score around, upper 70s, around 77. We had a few grades that could have been a little bit better, but we are working on it. I am here for you guys. And I think you guys will be a little bit better prepared for this next test. Keep in mind that I will drop your lowest test score at the end of the semester. So if you didn't do as well as you thought you did, if you wanted to, don't worry. I will drop your lowest test score. Okay, so as we look at, wars and how they occur or why they occur, the first thing we have to do is define what a war is. Okay, the definition of war is an interstate conflict with at least 1,000 battle deaths. But what I find very interesting about this definition is, why is it 1,000 battle deaths? What happens if it's 999 battle deaths? Is it then still a war? Well, that's an interesting question, especially when we look at other issues that we have in our country. 9/11 killed nearly 3,000. Terrorism, especially the horrible events that just happened in Las Vegas this morning, we're looking at about 58 deaths from the Las Vegas tragedy. Iraq War, 4,493. Various things. But what we have to understand is that war is costly. And it costs us both in blood, and what I mean by that is men lost, treasure, the amount of money that it costs to get these weapons there. We have to understand the states would rather get what they want without having to go to war, right? Because if we could get the things that we need without having to lose this blood and treasure, we would all be better off, okay? We look at three types of wars. We look at interstate wars, typically, and that's wars between states. Examples of this is World War I, World War II. Civil wars, Syria is a fine example right now, but, we could look at, Vietnam. We could look at Russia. We could look at our own civil war. And then, of course, there's ideological wars, things like the war on poverty, the war on drugs. They're ideological because there is no particular state involved. Now, the most sought after thing that nations fight for is territory. Here we have the example of Kashmir, where we have Pakistan, India, and China all vying for this resource. It's very resource-rich land, and they fight for that in order to gain those resources to improve their economy. Other things that countries fight for, national policy. We can think about things like, different types of nuclear weapons or some kind of economic policy. Regime types, people often fight wars for. We see this a lot when it comes to coups, ethnic or religious divisions. We see that in Israel. We're going to be looking at several reasons why wars occur. The first one is going to be outcome of a failed bargain. Okay, so sometimes there's an interaction between actors where they choose outcomes that make one better off at the expense of others. Okay, so bargaining is this idea that involves a fixed sum of value between two different actors. Now, there's a way that I can put this a little bit better. Okay, actors try to resolve disputes over allocation of a good. That is bargaining. Now, there's a separate type of bargaining called crisis bargaining. It's exactly the same thing, only it involves threats and use of force. Now, coercive diplomacy, essentially the exact same term. It's just another term for crisis bargaining, okay? Now, there's a model that we can use to be able to put this into terms that we can all understand. Okay, I like Game of Thrones. So let's just figure that the Starks are in Winterfell in Castle A. The Lannisters are in King's Landing. Okay, now They're fighting over this farmland that's centered between Castle A and Castle B. It's the object of contention, okay? Farmland, right? Right now, the current border is a little bit closer to B, but the Castle B feels like they're stronger than Castle A, and if they went to war, they could probably push that border out a few hundred yards, okay? So, the current border, and it's very important that you understand this, the current border is called the status quo. This is very easily a test question. The status quo means as it stands today, okay? The way it is right now, if nothing changes, okay? So, if they go to war and try to move out this new border, you have to understand that there's going to be devastation on both sides of that fence, okay? Now, devastation, we're talking about like burning fields, there could be bodies all over the ground, essentially making this land unfarmable, okay? So what it does is this land becomes a loss, okay? There's nothing that can be used for anymore because of this fighting, right? So we have to think about that when we go to war. Even if we want to fight for this, we now have a smaller net value to fight for. Now, Castle B will still get more land, but is there a way that we can bargain between this so we don't have to lose any land at all, and we can maximize the amount of farmland between the two castles, okay? Now, this lost land is now become the pre-alliance bargaining area, okay? A window of space that we can bargain from, okay? We're going to call this the bargaining range. Some window of choices that both sides would prefer to rather than going to war. They would save both bodies, they would save farmland, and everybody would be far better off. Now, we see that if the new border is proposed right there, Castle B would receive a lot more land. But Castle A would also save the lost life, also the lost land that they would lose in fighting for their area. So the one thing we need to know is for any A and B, we have to know that war is costly. The object of contention is always divisible, and there will always be at least one negotiated point. Okay? So there will always be a bargaining point. Now, a part of crisis bargaining is threats. Now, you have threats to deter. Now, this often means that you're trying to preserve the status quo. You're trying to deter your enemy from trying to go to war. And then there's threats to compel. Now, this means that you're trying to change the status quo. Now, we've seen this kind of bargaining before, especially right now. As we look at what Kim Jong-un is trying to do, he is trying to change the status quo, whereas Donald Trump is trying to keep the status quo. Next, we have war from incomplete information. Now, this leads from bargaining mistakes, right? So, at times you may be yielding too little or demanding too much, okay? The one thing that we have to do is understand that both countries have a lot of things to hide. Now, especially when it comes to, their capabilities, all right? We want to think about this in terms of a poker game. In a poker game, you are trying to hide what you have from the other players on the table. You have incentives to misrepresent the cards that you're holding. You may want to seem weaker so that you can get people to bet, so that you may take their money. You always want to keep your adversary guessing in order to have the upper hand. Next, we have resolve, okay? So, resolve is one of those things that whole classes could be written on, and I'm only going to spend about 30 seconds on it. Resolve is a varying measure of a nation's dedication to a commitment, okay? We need to understand how resolved we are to making our commitment. There are certainly ways to communicate this to our other countries, okay? The first one is called Brinksmanship, okay? It's actions that increase the risk of war in hopes that the enemy will back down. This is particularly what Trump's doing. By sending out warships to surround his peninsula, he's upping the ante. Okay, we've seen this before in the Cuban Missile Crisis. When Russia was supposedly putting nukes out on Cuba, President Kennedy blockaded the entire nation of Cuba. Now, we got very, very close to nuclear conflict, but in the last second, the Russians blinked. We are hoping that Trump's move by putting all these ships around the North Korean peninsula, the North Koreans also blink. The second way to communicate resolve is tying hands. So this is promising to your electorate, the voters that vote you in, but if you fail, you're going to you're going to receive audience costs, which means these people won't believe in you anymore. A good example of this is the first Gulf War, when President H.W. Bush said, Saddam Hussein, if you go into Kuwait, we are going to go to war. Well, Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait. President H.W. Bush had no choice. He either went to war or lost face in front of his own nation. So, he forced his hand. Saddam Hussein forced his hand, and we went to war. The third way is called paying for power. Now, we saw this all throughout the Cold War. When you buy a lot of weapons, you make a big show of it, that you are going to purchase more and more nuclear weapons, that you are going to do everything you can to be as strong as possible. War from commitment problems. Okay, let's say that we actually find a solution, a settlement with North Korea. Do you honestly believe that we can trust North Korea to honor the deal? Well, one of the ways that we can prevent this is bargaining over the future, okay? We can bargain now for goods that are a source of future bargaining power, i.e., what about Obama's Iran nuclear deal, right? We paid them $9 billion in hardcore cash and promised them nuclear energy as long as they didn't make nuclear weapons. This is Obama fighting for a stop now so that we don't have to go to war with them later. Next, we have preemptive and preventative war. Okay? Preemptive war is war in response to first strike advantages. We want to think about this as if the enemy that we're facing is strong right now, and we have to do everything we can to get there before they get us. A preventative war is a war to lock in advantages before the rising power can surpass you. The enemy's power is going to be strong in the future, not right now, strong in the future. So preemptive war, strong now; preventative war, strong in the future. War from indivisibility. Now, it's important to realize that indivisibility can be socially constructed. This often includes ideas of religion. Claims of indivisibility may be more strategic as well. And also the alleged indivisibility of goods may well be divisible the whole time. When we think about this, we often think of the war between the Israelis and the Palestinians. They're all fighting over over Jerusalem. Now, because of these holy sites are important to both people, it's a never-ending battle to fight for it. The issue is they're just fighting over land. Land can very well be divisible. So how do we make war less likely? Well, we could raise the costs. If we have nuclear weapons, the devastation to human life would be catastrophic. We can increase transparency. We can do this with satellites, with internet surveillance. We can also have outside enforcement, like the UN or NATO. There's also this idea of dividing indivisible goods. Not everything that they claim to be indivisible is indivisible. Land, for instance, very divisible. Okay, so it's still early, but it's been reported that the Las Vegas shooter was recruited by ISIS months ago. What I would ask you guys to do in Prompt 1 is explain whether you think this is an international attack on our soil and what should be done about it. And maybe answer the question, can ISIS be bargained with? Should we bargain with them? Can we trust them? And also, just on a personal note, if anybody has any family in Vegas, I'm deeply sorry. I hope nobody was affected. The second prompt, wars occur for a variety of reasons. What are some ways that you could imagine, if anything was possible, anything, to make war a thing of the past? You can use your imagination, you could create weapons, types of leadership, population controls. Let's see what you can come up with. I'm very interested to hear how you may stop war completely. Okay? Maybe you're an emperor, right, that can control everything. Anyways, as always, I need a one-page double-spaced MLA consistent essay on one of these topics due to me by Friday at midnight. I want you guys to have a great week.